issue that kept PAR together. But I will also say that I've been doing this with Robert. He thinks 3, I think 7, so we're probably both wrong, but we've been doing this little shtick together for a number of years, and I thanked him profusely for not criticizing the legislature for the first time. So obviously we must have been good this year. Y'all should give us all a hand, give at least Glenn and I a hand, because we were good this year. PAR, now I haven't read your commentary, so maybe it's hidden in there, but PAR didn't criticize us this year, which, I don't know, maybe he's also in that kumbaya spirit. But we passed 8 constitutional amendments. 6 of them seek to amend Article 7. Article 7 has had about 130 amendments filed to change it since 1975. They've only been 167 passed. Half of those have been to amend Article 7. Now, one would say that that means that our finance article is terrible. However, all of them are to, none of them are to improve Article 7 from a functional standpoint. They are to continue adding little bitty specific minor changes to programs. And I don't know that anybody understands the 2 that were proposed, excuse me, by the Speaker, where we're going to create some special funds in the Constitution by which we are going to fund private hospitals and private nursing homes. But it must have been a great idea. They together must be great ideas because they passed without an objection in either the House or the Senate. And they will be on the ballot either this fall or next fall, depending on how the Secretary of State decides to interpret the election code. And then there are the 2 of them, we couldn't do this in one, the 2 of them that have to do with homestead exemption exceptions, one for disabled veterans and one for people who are old. And Glenn and I are about to get into that old thing, so this is the last year I'm going to criticize that idea. But in 2010, we said that if a veteran was totally disabled, that they would be able to be realize a further exemption to their homestead exemption. Well, apparently the Veterans Affairs, we forgot to ask the VA in Washington what that meant, and they don't classify people the way that we amended our Constitution to classify them. So we have to amend our Constitution to classify them the way the VA classifies them, hoping against hope that the VA won't change their minds and go back to where it was in 2010, which then we'll have to amend the Constitution. Anyway, this is what we do with our Constitution continually. We passed one in Article 3, which is my home article, about the legislature that seeks to say that these rebates that we love to give away are only going to be able to be considered in odd-numbered years. Back when the state started giving away money in tax credits, the members realized, oh my goodness, I can only do that every other year. That's not a really good plan. I like to give away money every year, so we're going to give rebates, and we're going to call them rebates, and everybody else in the world may think of them as a tax credit, but we're going to call them rebates. Ergo, we can do them every year, because in the even years we'll call them rebates, and the odd years we'll call them credits, and everybody will be happy. So we're going to add a list of 3 items that will not be on our agenda in even-numbered years and only be able to be considered in odd-numbered years, which is what we did this year: rebates, incentives, abatements. Now, I don't know what abatement is. Of course, I don't know what a tax exclusion is either. That's in that list in the Constitution. You may think, so what if Spear doesn't understand? The problem is that Glenn and I get looked at by members with these deer in the headlights eyes like, can I do that? And they expect us to tell them yes. We don't always tell them yes. But my point about this is we're adding 3 new terms because the old terms weren't specific enough. Well, these 3 terms aren't specific enough either. All this is going to do is have some bright lawyer in some, white stocking law firm in downtown Baton Rouge come up with a new term. And the way the Constitution works, terms have to be specific, have to be strictly interpreted. And so if rebates morphs into some other term, they won't be accepted. But this is our boss's attempts to ratchet down on the giveaway programs. And the last one has to do with wildlife and fisheries. Apparently the people in North Louisiana don't like the way the governor's appointing members to the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission. None of them live above the intercoastal waterway, I think, but they always use I-10. So we're going to attempt to amend the Constitution to add 2 North Louisiana people to the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission. So when they're setting the white and brown shrimp season and the catch limit on red snapper, the people who argue about whether it's a sac-a-lait or a crappie or a white perch will probably be able to take a powder and come back at the end. We didn't actually, as Glenn said, we really don't know what we did. I don't think you know what we did. They don't know what they did. So I think, Gene, you really ought to put this off a week. Not this year. This is it for me this year. But this day after is way too early to give any prognostications about effectiveness or what they did to you. Anybody interested in the ethics code or the open meetings law or the public records law, I suggest you read the 15 bills that affect those 3 areas and you'll be depressed. Thank you.
Oh, Butch, I couldn't put this off. It's a tradition, number 1. And number 2, there would be too much media discussion and they wouldn't have the benefit of y'all's knowledge. So it'll be the day after. And to wrap it up, we have John McGinnis, who will bring us the personalities and the politics. John?
Thank you, Gene.
Everybody knows John McGinnis.
Well, thank you very much, Gene. I'm glad to be here today. And, you know, I was still trying to figure out what happened. I was, before I came, I picked up the copy of the nation's largest every other daily, the Times-Picayune, which declared on the front page, legislature takes on the governor and wins. And I thought, well, first, it's kind of hard to take someone on who's left the ring. And 2, what did they win? It more reminds me of the dog that finally caught the car, you know, and it's trying to figure that out. I love, of course, to know the governor, the first day of the session, he parked his tax plan. I hope he gave a raise to whoever came up with that verb. That was because it's been repeated on and on, and you can see these guys sitting around him saying, well, we can say scrap, and we can say shelf, and we can say junk. Park, great, you know. Good. He not only parked the car, he let the air out of the tires, and then he climbed in the back seat and became a backseat driver for the rest of the session, barking out commands, but there was no one in the driver's seat because the legislature was over there riding shotgun, protecting the Second Amendment. What I saw, worked over that bad for yeah, worked that one through. So the legislature was really kind of realized what they had to do was balance a budget, and that wasn't pretty. But what I saw happen in session, which I thought was a shame, I thought it was a missed opportunity. This was supposed to be a tax reform session. They left with last year's reality check we were talking about this year. They were coming back, and the legislature was going to really look at the tax code and see which exemptions are worthwhile and which ones aren't. But after going through the whole 3-month run-up of twisting and turning over the governor's income tax appeal plan, I remember Joe Robideau, the chairman of the Ways and Means, after the last, they refused to even hear the tax bills. I asked him, was there going to be any effort to really kind of look at the tax code? He said, well, no, there's tax fatigue. Well, they never heard a bill, never even debated anything, but just that whole 3-month run-up wore them out on the whole issue. So I thought that was a missed opportunity because certainly, as the governor said, Louisiana has the 4th lowest tax burden, but we're rated 32nd because of the complications of the tax code. So it seems like they really could have done some things to simplify it. But I love how, especially with the governor, you hear the old expression of, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. How about add rankings at the end of that? Because, the general can come up with a ranking that don't mean anything. What we did see, the the governor certainly had less influence. He just took himself out of the process. I don't think there was any, but he laid out some parameters of what he did not want to happen. He didn't, and he was able to see those through. With no taxes were raised, not even 2 cents a month on cell phones to aid deaf people with hearing devices, and no even the elimination of exemptions that would not be offset by other tax cuts. Well, that took all the fun out of even dealing with tax exemptions if the legislators realized they couldn't raise any money by doing it, so they didn't get involved in that. And there'd been no expansion of Medicaid, which is probably, because the government said by 10 years from now it would cost the state $1.7 billion. This is the most long-range thinking that Bobby Jindal has engaged in, to worry about what 2 governors from now we're going to have to deal with. You would have thought that he would have taken the free money and go, but I think he probably is thinking long range about his political future, and that he could stand up and say that he was one of the governors that wouldn't accept Medicaid. And there's kind of a lot of reasons going on with we keep a segregated healthcare system, one for poor people and one for people with insurance. And there was even Bruce Greenstein, before he had to resign, said that if half of the state had a Medicaid card, that you wouldn't want to go to your own community hospital because it was, all those poor people would be there. So that, I think, was part of the underlying reason behind what the governor did. So with him out of the way, the legislature was kind of left to their own devices about how to balance the budget without raising taxes. We got into the issue of whether or not to spend one-time money, which I really found a really kind of false argument, even trying to define what one-time money is. In fact, as with the final score on that was that the legislature said that there was between only $30 and $45 million of one-time money for recurring expenses in the budget. Well, I asked, and at one point, as the bill passed the Senate, there was like about $200 million. And I asked Appropriations Chairman Jim Fannin, well, how did y'all do that? Go from 200 down to 45? We just redefine what one-time money is. I said, oh, good. It's a semantical thing. But it was an attempt to get the state away from relying on lawsuits that have not been settled yet, and some other property sales for which there is no buyer yet. I don't consider the use of taking sweeping money out of dedicated funds as really one-time money, because that money is going to be back next year. But the fact that we keep having this argument for the last 5 years about one-time money should show that there's really no such thing, because there's always money, one-time money. And if we have all these dedicated funds, if we have a downturn to where we're cutting back on healthcare and cutting back on higher education, I don't have a problem on cutting back on the artificial refund. Of course, they've been not just cutting back, they've been just stealing wholesale from it. But that's part of. I don't see a real problem with doing that. But I am glad that the legislature finally came to terms with some of the more rank or specious funds of money. As for what other things they did, we have rules about how things are supposed to be done in the state, which the legislature, just like I wrote a column about how the state capitol is going to be a nice place to be during a hurricane or a tornado or a flood. It stands on high ground, granite, strong, impregnable for anything nature could throw at it, except for the snakes, which are crawling in through the side doors because we don't have proper weather stripping on the doors. But that's just, I think that's a metaphor for our state government itself, which shows that any provision, law, rule, constitutional precept, there's a way to get around it. And we sure found ways to do that. The Board of Regents is supposed to allocate resources to higher education, and yet we had this bill this year to go around that plan and bust the debt ceiling and borrow another $250 million to build community college campuses and centers around the state. Good purpose, but again, kind of breaking a rule to do it. Healthcare and higher ed complain about how we dedicate so much money that they're the first ones to get cut. So the hospital solution was dedicate some more money for them to protect themselves. It leaves higher education out in the cold. Even questions about that there'll be no taxes raised. Well, of course, that depends on what you call a tax. The New Orleans Convention and Visitors Bureau was able to get a bill passed that allows them to voluntarily assess themselves an extra 1.7% on each hotel room, because they assess themselves, the hotel guests are going to pay it. But they say it's not a tax, it's an assessment. And it's for proof. They even had Grover Norquist say that, well, it's not a tax. So he said it's not a tax, Bobby Jindal said it's not a tax. The only people who will say it's a tax are the ones that have to pay it, which, the people who are going down to New Orleans to spend a night. So, but that's part of the way Louisiana government runs. I think in 2 years going forward, or 2 more sessions, legislative sessions we'll probably see a continued non-involvement from the governor. He's entering he is more of a lame duck. He can't get things done that he wants to get done unless he, that is, unless he involves the legislator and talks to them and gets their input, which he doesn't want to do. But he can still, so screw that. But he can still stop things from happening. And he's got the line item veto, and he has this bully pulpit against taxes. So I see not a whole lot of stuff happening in the next 2 years, which will be okay if we just don't have as much as the bad stuff like mid-year budget cuts. There was some hope leaving the session this year, maybe it's misplaced, that finally the economy is beginning to catch up with the governor's press clippings about it, and it started to generate some of the revenue that we've been waiting for all these years, so that perhaps that we won't face these mid-year budget cuts going forward. Of course, the next fight will be over what to spend, how to spend the money, if there is any left next year. So this interesting coalition between the fiscal hawk Republicans and the Democrats, it will probably be tested in the future when there's some real money on the table. I asked one of the Democrats, why are they getting involved with the Republicans like this? Because, their values are not the same, especially on things like raising money and spending it. And of course, our Representative Sam Jones, one of my favorites from Franklin City, said, well, no one's dated me for 6 years. Finally, he's getting someone, the Democrats have just been shut out for 6 years, and finally had someone who'll talk to them. So they're all fired up and ready to do it. So while this is going on, the legislature was trying to find its way without having a governor to fight with. The governor is going about his wholesale change of our healthcare system, which that's one of the really massive, big, historic things going on in state government at this time, and he is able to keep his education. Privatization of education going on too with the vouchers. So in the end, the fiscal hawks got their limits on one-time money, which they wanted. The Democrats got their pay raise for teachers, which they wanted. The Republicans got out without having to raise taxes, and the governor got his vouchers renewed. So everyone got something coming out of this session. There wasn't a whole lot out there to get. And we'll know that we have a more independent legislature. It will be probably really the next term when we start again. And if the House doesn't have to stop and go ask the governor who the speaker should be, then I'll know that we probably have an independent session. We already know who the next Senate president is going to be, but the same one we got, Mr. Lario, who's probably the one rock in steadiness that's holding this whole thing from total chaos. So, but that's not, we can't depend on him forever to do that. So we'll look forward to Louisiana continuing its journey, its odyssey, and trying to decide really whether it's going to join a union. And we'll know more about that in the next couple of years. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And now you see why we can't wait for the press and everybody else to have an opinion when we have the benefit of these brilliant people up here. I want to kick this off with one question, because I haven't heard anybody mention a word about it. Where's the money coming from how are we going to recover the money that was spent out of MFP last year on the vouchers? How are we going to get that back? Does anybody have an answer for that?
I think the superintendent, I don't know if it's in the budget or not, but the superintendent said the state had to come up with $30 million to pay, then a supplemental bill. So that money. And then the money for vouchers next year is in HB1.
No, I mean the money that was paid out of MFP. I mean, does that have to be paid back? Huh?
It's in the supplemental budget bill for this year, $21 million.
Okay. Well, that's pocket change, I guess.
That's still $9 million short.
That's the local dollars that were withheld.
We have Robert Scott that would like to say something now.
Well, it wouldn't be a reality check without a little repartee between Butch and me. I just wanted to, correct a couple of things that Butch said. When he was describing his maybe potential retirement plans, he finally finished up by saying, I don't want to be seen as the formerly living clerk. I don't think that's quite what he meant, saying the formerly living clerk. I think maybe he meant to say, I want to be the living former clerk. But then there's a problem there, because if I said that I wanted rather he be the living former clerk, that would imply that I wanted him to retire. And if I said the opposite, that would imply that I wanted him to die. So I'm going to stay away from that and let him clarify his own remark. The other thing is that I know that sometimes you just like to hear the good news, but I thought maybe pointing out that the legislature had either neglected some of the massive problems that we face in the state on many levels, or had booked in a lot of additional expenses for the future without really taking responsibility for them. And I thought maybe that would seem like a criticism, but it just depends on how it rings on your ears. But I invite you to read the commentary. But anyway, great kudos to Butch. We give a great shout out to him here for the great work they're doing on the open records thing, on the new website, the Wi-Fi in the legislature is terrific. These guys, they get those archives, the meetings posted right away. All this is a really great service, and I've used other states' legislative websites on occasion, and you guys just do a great job. You compare very well. So I hope you don't mind me saying something positive.
You missed one important piece of legislation, even though it was a baby step. We have equal pay is on its way for female employees in the state government. It's a baby step. But please, everybody, get on the phone and call the governor and tell him to sign that sucker. Okay, Lewis?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want you to know I've talked to the bishops. We're going to have extra collections on Sunday to get the rest of that $9 million from them. Thought that was a reasonable way to do it. Butch, I do appreciate your realistic description of what actually happens in the legislature. And I'm going to ask you a question because Glenn's probably tired of seeing me after these 60 days that lasted 6 months. But Mr. Scott, as well as you mentioned the UAL and the problems with the pension funds. How much of the UAL problem is actually caused by the failure of the legislature to actually appropriate what should have been put in there over the years?
You have a reasonable expectation that I can answer that.
You brought it up.
I brought it up in the context of 5 years ago, they had so much money they actually dumped some on the UAL. I think that may be the only time. But to continue the repartee between Robert and I, one of my former bosses was challenged in his phraseology, and he wanted to name the meeting rooms in the basement of the Capitol on the House side after speakers who had deceased. And he couldn't get out former living speakers versus living former speakers versus former speakers still living. and every time he got into one of those things, it would just get worse. His tongue would get more tied. And so ever since then, I have purposely expressed my desire to actually be able to walk away from the job that I've held all these years, so that someone at some point in time can refer to me as the formerly living clerk in the way that he referred to the prior speakers who had passed on of being speaker before they passed on of being. I can't answer the question. I mean, everybody talks about where the UAL came from. And we all want to blame Buster Sheridan, used to be Glenn's, he's a formerly living legislator, from Washington Parish, who was chairman of a retirement committee in the House forever. And when we were young and showed up, Buster had been there for at least 20 years by that time, and he was there for another 20, and he would explain retirement bills to the House by chuckling. Well, it's a little old bill, it doesn't hurt nobody. Then he'd walk off, and they'd pass it. And until the, I don't know, the 90s, when we went through a fit of fiscal responsibility and we created these expenditure limits, we created the bond limits, and we started actually talking about that there was an unfunded accrued liability for the first time, and stuck it in the Constitution as an appropriate use of those, quote, one-time monies. Nobody ever paid attention. And then they created that program to pay it off in 35 years. Well, we've gone through 20 of those 35 years. It was always a backloaded program. It was never intended to be a mathematical decreasing of state payments as more and more of the debt was paid off. It was intended to be a very small payment at the beginning, and then at the end, farther into the future than any of them could ever see, 20 years. That's when the state was going to get held to account, and it was going to go straight up on the graph and then straight across at the top. Well, we actually refinanced that once to make it not happen for 27 years. Well, we're only 7 years away from the 27 years, and now it's not that the UAL is such a problem, it's the fact that we are now paying for that old UAL in a much larger percentage than we did even 5 years ago when the governor was first elected. The amount of payment to that, I think they call it IUAL or something like that, just to make sure nobody knows what it is. And so the percent that is being paid by the employer on my salary to pay off the UAL that has nothing to do with paying the retirement that I hope to draw when I'm formerly living clerk, is larger than the amount that they're actually paying for my current benefit. My current benefit, I put in an amount of money, the state puts in 2/3 of what I put in, and that is less than half of what the state pays to the retirement system for my salary. Because all the rest of that is to pay off a UAL that had nothing to do with me or anybody else who's currently working. Was that an obfuscation enough?
Thank you for clearing that up
Yeah.
and making it completely understandable. I did want to give whoever else was responsible
Sure.
one more compliment, whether it was you or Glenn or whoever. The elementary course in the Constitution that seemed to have happened between last session and this session that will keep us out of these court battles. Whoever was responsible, I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, next question. George.
Yeah, this question could be for Robert or anyone about the Stelly plan largely unraveled and more putting us in a financial bind. My question is about oil and gas revenue and to what extent that might bail out the state and the governor. Tuesday morning on CNBC, right before the opening bell on Wall Street, Jim Cramer said, if you want to know where jobs are, Louisiana and Texas Gulf Coast, oil and gas are booming. I haven't heard much about oil and gas revenue and estimating conference and all. Where does that fit in the picture?
Okay, which one wants to take this? Robert?
Let me just also mention that PAR did a report looking at the cash balance plan last year. They can't hear. And within that, we give, I think, a really solid and clear explanation of the unfunded accrued liability and the different aspects of it. So I'll point you to that as a place to go and try to get some information on it. Yeah, we've got BP money, have more offshore money for oil and gas. And, that might be a benefit to us in the long run. The big question is how much of that is going to be dedicated to coastal projects.
We're not picking you up on the... There you go, hold it.
How much of that is going to end up, going to coastal restoration and protection type projects, and how much of it might get siphoned off into the budget.
Just gonna have to hold.
Louisiana historically relied heavily on the service tax to fund, to fund state government. And after the 1980s, that when we had the oil crash, that's when the bubble burst on that. And largely, we have never really recovered since then, because what we've done is we've tried to find essentially another easy way to solve our problem. We try to use gambling. It's what we call it gaming in the Constitution. It's actually gambling, but gambling is our Constitution. So if you call it gaming, that's okay. That's okay. To actually, and they never gaming has never quite replaced the money that we use to generate from oil and gas. And since we don't want to raise the income tax substantially, since we don't want to repeal the homestead exemption, or at least reduce it to some degree, we always currently are subject to budget problems. We have now. Some say, yeah, one of the huge tax exemptions among those 468 and counting exemptions is that we give huge exemptions to a lot of these oil companies, the natural gas companies who engage in this highly questionable practice of fracking, and that can be one of the things, and one of the main groups who will resist any significant effort to roll back tax exemptions will be those kinds of people. Now, the severance tax doesn't pay for as much as it used to pay for, because in the 1920s, when we started doing this, most of the oil and gas that in the state of Louisiana came from Louisiana. Actually, came out of Louisiana. Now, we are really more of an oil processing state than we are a production state. In a lot of ways, so look at a lot of the oil that's refined in our refineries comes from out of state, or really out of the country, but we don't tax that. Most of what we're taxing is what comes from Louisiana, and so that's essentially been the argument that Foster Campbell has been making for about 20 years, and unsuccessfully, that we ought to be taxing the oil that's being processed in the state. And of course, there are those who will say, well, if you do that, they'll go ahead and move, and that's a terrible idea. As if these refineries actually have somewhere that they can go, that somebody actually wants them. You can't move the Mississippi River, which is one reason why these plants are here. But lawmakers have listened to that argument under the threat that if you ever vote for this thing, you will never return to office. So I said all that to say that there's really not, at least on the immediate political horizon, much hope that more taxes to oil and gas are in the offering, and promise any solution to our budget problems.
Thank you. Jeff, one last question.
Okay, just the same question I had earlier. I mean, limited as I am by my public education and my 100 pages of Louisiana history, Huey Long, Evan Edwards, the fact that we have been leaders in my mind,
Put this in front of you.
as to public education and public health. What exactly are we trying to achieve with privatizing public education and public health? You mentioned it earlier. I mean, what we mean? I mean, does anybody know? What are we trying to do?
Let me try and see if I can say this without spending 2 hours. Governor Jindal and some other people, but really personifies a ideology and philosophy that we have seen ever since he was elected. It is a quite frankly very radical conservative vision of government. This idea is essentially that for the most part the public sector cannot be trusted to do anything, period. And so he has essentially set out to not only, in my view, undo Huey Long and that vision of what the role of government is, but it's almost to me like the revenge of the Bourbons, taking us back to the 19th century. In other words, about the only thing that the government is good for right now in this vision is to turn over virtually every public function to some private entity. That has been the driving, and what they have done, what they have done since Katrina, since the change in the legislature and all that, historical democratic weakness, they have, and the crisis supported the state, and also the fact that we had an economic crisis, Medicaid crisis. They have used all these crises to argue that see those who had this populist vision are wrong, and this is why they're wrong, and so we have to privatize everything. And to some degree, the Democrats have sort of helped them, because the Democrats, quite frankly, have not always been the best steward of the state's dollars. Okay, in many instances, they haven't really cared about that to some degree, and rightly or wrongly, Democrats have been the majority party in the state since Reconstruction, and actually before that. And so they got blamed. So populism has made it be lampooned. That seems to be the overarching vision, and it seems to animate almost every policy decision they make. Whether it's privatizing state agencies, to privatizing education, to privatizing healthcare. It's a very narrow vision of conservatism. In a lot of ways, it's internally inconsistent in many ways. Just to give you one example, let's use the Bayou Health example. This is being argued as the virtues of the private market, but it is being subsidized by the state. This is not totally a private market. The only reason that private companies are participating is because of the state subsidy. Healthcare. See, the problem with privatizing the hospitals is that private hospitals are corporations. Corporations are in the business of making money. You don't make money by giving care to people who cannot afford it. And we should not expect corporations to do that. There are certain things that corporations should not be expected to do because they are profit-seeking organizations. We want them to make a profit. That's why there's a need for the public sector. This government does not believe in the public sector except when it comes to paying his salary and giving contracts to his political contributors. That is the only function of the public sector in Jindal's universe.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so very much for coming. I invite you to join us. And the views that have been expressed are those of our presenters, and only that which I have spoken personally are the views of Leaders with Vision. Thank you, and we'll see you in August. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.